Hi, and welcome to our lesson today. Today we're going to be talking about the French and Indian War in North America. So this is going to be part of our lesson on the English Empire, kind of facing some problems here in North America. This goes along, it's kind of like the next step after learning about the colonies of the New World. So let's get learning today about the French and Indian War. I also, of course, want to introduce myself. My name is Mrs. Vital Spot, and if you want to learn about history, you've come to the Vital Spot. So I really hope that we can all get together and get some learning accomplished and have a pretty good time doing so. I hope to do this in about 10 minutes. Not looking to go deep into this. If you are interested in this topic at all, there's a great movie out there called The Last of the Mohicans that would be really enjoyable for you, and there's, tons of books and wonderful things that you can do. But this is just going to be kind of a brief introduction, get you some of the main ideas, the main points, and this will be really helpful for anyone who's studying for the New York State Regents exam in American history and government. But it'll be good for anybody who's interested about learning a little bit about the French and Indian War, hopefully clarify any problems you may have in studying this a little bit, because it is a little bit of a confusing war. We got to understand it to really get into the details of it. So the first thing we need to understand, and if you flip back to my previous lesson on the colonies, we do know that the French were in North America, and when we're talking about the French in North America, they are in kind of a little bit western Pennsylvania, or western United States, not like, California, Oregon, and Washington western. I'm talking about like western New York, western Pennsylvania, but that's the west at this time. And what is current day Canada. And this is hugely important. We're going to look at kind of why the French and the English have so many issues to begin with, because the French and the English issues go back to England. And their problems is that there's old rivalries there. They want to know who has the power in Europe, who has the power in Asia, and what we're going to focus on today, who has the power in North America. Is it the French in North America? Is the English in North America? Because everyone wants all the power, and the French want North America, and the English want North America. And they want to know who's stronger, so they're going to physically have to fight it out. Battle it out. Who's the strongest power? So they're going to have to put their military power to the might. There was no Call of Duty at the time, so in order to show how strong they were militarily, instead of just going on the internet and going on a computer and playing a war game about it, they actually had to do it. So they actually go and fight, and they have to show, they all get to wear their fancy hats and their, big swords and stuff like that. So they need to show their military power. And they also have a concept of whose religion was right. We've seen this before when we've talked about the 17th and 16th century. Whose religion is right? We have the Anglicans in England. We have the Catholics in France. Well, obviously, one of those religions has got to be right. Which one is it? I don't know. But that's what this is about. The English need to say the Anglicans are right. The French need to say the Catholics are right. So that's what this has a little bit to do with, religion. And they want, again, we said power meant more land. Who has the most land? Money is power, land is power. So, in order to understand the French and Indian War, we have to know that it's part of a greater war, the 7 Years' War. So, everybody from across the internet world shout out how many years the 7-Year War was. Did you say 7 years? Well, then you'd be wrong. Why would you say 7 years? It's not. Obviously, the 7 Years' War took somewhere between 9 to 23 years. Historians aren't really good with math, but they call it the 7 Years' War. A bulk of the fighting starts takes about 7 years. You add kind of the 9 actually comes from the 2 years previously that so the 7 years, let me go back. 7 Years' War is kind of the European version and the continuation of the French and Indian War. And the causes of this are the old rivalries that we were just kind of talking about. The English and the French haven't gotten along together in quite some time. They have this problem. So that's one of the causes. The French are trying to expand in North America. They're trying to make a larger empire. They have alliances with tribes. We're going to look at it in a second. And this all encompasses the problem. And it's going to be from the European problem. They're going to bring that to North America. They're just going to fight the French and Indian War. Then they're going to continue that for about 2 years. They're going to fight. They're going to start this in North America. Then they're going to really start fighting in Europe as well. And that is where we're going to get the 7 years kind of in Europe is then going to be added on to the 2 years in the United States, making it the 9. The 23 years, because it does, many historians will say that it went on for 23 years, has a lot to do with just the little snippets here and there. So the bulk does kind of happen in that 9 years, but it does actually go on for about 23 years. So 7 Year War takes somewhere between 9 to 23 years. Historians ultimately not good with math. So I want to talk a little bit about the alliances that we're seeing. So we see in the French and Indian War, we have 2 groups of Native Americans. Please understand, there are a zillion other tribes of Native Americans out there. I am not trying to belittle these tribes. I just don't want this video to take a zillion years. So we're going to look at kind of the main groups of Native Americans who were fighting the French and Indian War. So the French and Indian War, also being called the 9 years or the 7 Years' War sometimes, is also, to me, it should be called the French and the Indians versus the English and the Indians War. Because the idea, when you hear French and Indian War, it sounds like the French and the Indians are fighting. It doesn't really tell us what the story is. But in fact, the French and Indian War is about the British and the British colonists and their Native American allies versus the French and their Native American allies. So who were whose allies? So the first group I want to look at is the Iroquois Confederacy. And they're made up of 5 Native American nations. I'm going to go through them. These guys, and I'll tell you now, these guys are aligned with the English. The Iroquois Confederation is aligned with the English and the English settlers. So they're aligned with Britain. And you have the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, and the Oneida. For those of you who are using this to help you with your New York State Regents exam, if those names sound familiar, it's because every single one of those names is a town in the state of New York. This group of Native Americans, the Iroquois Confederacy, is a New York-based tribal organization. In their traditional lands are in the state of New York. So for those of us who are studying for our New York State Regents, not a bad idea to kind of know a little bit here because they're part of our little homeland. So the Iroquois Confederacy, made up of 5 nations, Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, and Oneida, are based in New York, and they are allies with the English, the British, and the British colonists. And the other side, and like I said, you know, there are lots of other tribes in here. I'm just focusing on some of the main ones. We have on the French side, we have the Algonquins and the Hurons that were supporting the French. So why does France want more land. Can't these people be satisfied? No, of course not. No one's ever satisfied. We all want more. I can't even be satisfied with my own personal life with, oh, I saw that on TV. That looks cool. I kind of want that too. Well, the French feel the same way. They want more land because land gives you power. Land equals power. Okay, of course it does. They also want to convert Native Americans to Catholics. The French were extremely talented at this. Brought to you by the Jesuit, which is an organization of priests. And these mostly Jesuit priests would go into North America and then move westward. And as they moved westward, they did something that wasn't necessarily being done with other native tribes. They learned the native language, they learned the customs, and they started to incorporate some of that in. So they were doing, it's not a perfect society, of course, they do some pretty horrific things, but they actually kind of like learn some stuff. Novel idea, right? Instead of just killing them. But they're ultimately trying to convert them to Catholics because they thought if they were converted to Catholics, then they'd, have some kind of value. It just sounds stupid when you say it, doesn't it? People wouldn't have value unless converted to Catholicism, but that's history for you. It doesn't always make sense. Okay, and the other reason is this stuff right here. Fur. The French want fur. Furry, fluffy little dead animals, right? Of course, I don't have a lot of fur, but this is what the French are looking for, particularly what I'm holding right here in my hand. This is a little bit of beaver fur, okay? Beaver fur was extremely popular. They started making beaver fur hats out of it, and you guys can't feel a vision. No, beaver fur also has a water-resistant thing, so it was great for clothing and caps and stuff. So it had, because beavers are like, basically fish. Not really. Please don't tell your science teacher I said that. I just mean that they live in water a lot. They're not actually fish. They're mammals. But they're waterproof. They've got this oily fur that goes on top. You see like this kind of long stuff, and then they've got really dense underfur. So this makes them, you see all that? Look at that underfur there. Okay, that makes them really great, so that they make great hats. They look really nice and snazzy, and people started killing them. Tons of poor beavers lost their lives for French beauty and the Beast. Okay, so those were kind of the things that the French wanted. They wanted their land, they wanted to convert natives to Catholics, and they wanted fur. So we talked a little bit about the 7 Years' War that was going on in Europe, just kind of, and it's considered oftentimes seen as the First World War, not like 1914, 1917, 1919 First World War, but it's a war that is fought on 5 continents. 5 continents! That's a lot of continents. It's all but 2 of them, and no one lives in Antarctica, so who cares? So 5 continents fought in the 7 Years' War. That is a world war, man. In fact, like the First World War, that 1914 to 1919 one, that only contained 6 continents. And ain't all that much of a difference, yo. Okay, so is oftentimes seen as the First World War, and the French and Indian War is a division of this larger 7 Years' War that's taking place in Europe. One of the other key things we want to know about the French and Indian War is the Albany Plan. And the Albany Plan brings us our very first political cartoon. This is too big to be on my screen right now. Okay? This is the first political cartoon that is brought out in the Americas, and it's made by our very own Benjamin Franklin. And the idea is that you need to join or we ain't gonna make it, yo. Okay? So if you can't, that's upside down. Let's try that again. There it is. There's our first political cartoon, okay? And the idea is that this snake cannot survive if we don't all join together, Okay? And the Albany Plan was a plan for the colonists to gather together in Albany, New York, future capital of the state of New York, way to go, New York, and come up with a plan on how the colonists were going to help succeed in winning the French and Indian War against the French. How were they going to do this? And they started to do several things like discuss taxation, and this is just the colonists. This has nothing to do with England, just the colonists in the Americas. So they started to say, like, well, we can start taxing and we can start kind of creating a little bit of an army and we can plan to work together. And unfortunately, it failed. We love you, Ben Franklin, but this didn't work. It's not your fault, man. There was bad weather. 6 colonies had a hard time making it up to Albany. But it's a great idea, and it does eventually help spark the idea of kind of a American world, right? An American-owned independent republic. Okay, this is kind of the very, 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 very spark. It's kind of like going out on a date and kind of like, oh, maybe I like them. Okay, it's kind of that idea, like, oh, I think they're cute. Like, gonna go back later on and talk to that person. It's the same idea. This is like, hey, you know what? Remember way back when, during the French and Indian War, we came up with the Albany Plan and we all kind of met together? Maybe we should do that again. That was kind of a good idea. So we're going to see this idea in a few years when we start talking about the Revolution. So the French and Indian War, let's get into the good stuff. The French and Indian War, we're getting about 3 phases that we're looking at. And we're going to look at FortNecessity, and we're going to look at the start of the actual French and Indian War, or the start of the 7 Years' War. We're going to look at the phase 3, the conclusion of at the Treaty of Paris. And phase 1, FortNecessity, takes place on July 3rd, 1754. Wow, God, that sounds like such a familiar date. Oh, that's the real Independence Day. Well, that's for a later lesson, but I suggest discovering why July 3rd is actually an extremely important day in America. So what we have going on is that the French were starting to expand into western Pennsylvania. They were actually expanding into what is kind of present day Pittsburgh. Okay, and they were being led. They had a fort there called Duquesne, and the colonists and the English decided we're going to attack Fort Duquesne. They send this man. I'm sure his name's not important or anything like that. I mean, no one has ever heard of this guy before. George Washington. Yeah. Oh, you've heard of him? He's on the money? Of course he is. No one knew him then. He was a colonel in the English army, right? So Colonel George Washington, a young man, attacks Fort Duquesne, and because he's George Washington and we know he's great, he of course he lost. He lost. In fact, he does this not just once. He was captured, but he does it again, and he loses again. From great failure rises a great man. Of course, George Washington, the founder of our nation, the father of America, captured and loses a fort twice. But he does then build FortNecessity, and we do get eventual success out of this. And the French started to hold counterattack, and Washington is forced to surrender. So there is FortNecessity. You can go and visit FortNecessity today, right now. In fact, that is a modern picture of FortNecessity. So pack up your stuff, get on out there. That'd be fun to do, huh? Ooh, funny things happening on my computer. Okay, and then we kind of have the start of the 7 Years' War in Europe, as I talked about. We have the French and Indian War, and then it kind of melds into Europe. And it's a continuation of the French and Indian War, and that is the official 7 Years' War, which again lasts way longer than 7 years. And on the New World side, the French were starting to lose, even though we had the FortNecessity thing and Washington not doing the things we know Washington to do, and they start to lose. So ultimately, we get to kind of move into our Phase 3 plan, which was when King George III, he's the guy we really hate in a few years, becomes King of England. He wants to end the war, get this thing over with. I don't want to have to deal with it anymore, and he creates the Treaty of Paris. And the Treaty of Paris basically requires that the French need to cede all their land to England. They do give the French Newfoundland in Canada, as well as the, which is part of the Great Banks, and that is a prized fishing area. And so they continue to allow the French in that area, which, you know, is actually why I have some of this stuff. This is from northern Canada, the furs that I collected, which is still a very French area, even though they gave up their land 200 years ago. So what are the main effects of the French and Indian War? What happens and why do you give a darn? Well, because you're going to be taking some kind of statewide test at the end of the year. No, because you want to learn. That's why you're doing this. Oh, I really hope so. That'd be cool. But no, what we're looking at is the idea of treatment of liberty. What the heck? What is she talking about? The treatment of liberty? She's lost her mind. It's when we fight a war? Of course it is. It's like Captain America. No, so what we see here is that during the French and Indian War, some of the colonists, the English colonists, were going, I don't like the way I'm being treated by the British. I don't feel respected. It's like they don't respect my liberties. Yeah, that's how they were starting to feel. Like they realized the English didn't give a darn about them. That's kind of sad, and they started to realize that. So this is going to spark the idea that England might not always take care of us. We're also going to see Native relations. Again, kind of the treatment of the English. The French, you know, and again, I'm not saying the French were perfect in this. The French they had pretty good trade relations with the natives. The English kind of continued to use this opportunity for really bad reasons. They create one of the first kind of known germ warfare on these native people. This is when they start to take smallpox, a disease that many Europeans were resistant to. They were putting it on blankets and then trading it or giving it to the native people who didn't have the natural resistance to smallpox, who got smallpox and died. I mean, this was crazy tactics, and that's not good. And then we also have the Proclamation Line of 1763. And the Proclamation Line of 1763 basically draws a line in western New York and western Pennsylvania and kind of going straight down. And it says, okay, English colonists, you can't cross this line. You will not be protected from native attacks. And this is kind of the end of the line. This is as far as we're going to go. And the colonists said, the hell were we fighting the French and Indian War for if we can't move west? That's the whole point. So that made everyone kind of sad. And then it's also about money. This war and all wars cost a lot of money. And the English do a lot of taxation. They do taxation, and the colonists say, the hell are you taxing us for? Again, it's going to lead to a revolution within the colonies. So I hope that you've gotten something out of today's lesson on the French and Indian War. We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the Greater War, the 7 Years' War that lasted a lot longer than 7 years. We've talked about what the French were doing in America and why they wanted power. We talked about some kind of long-standing hatred between the French and the English. We talked about George Washington's kind of less than stellar war record in the French and Indian War. We talked about the Albany Plan, kind of the first seeds of some kind of national identity as an American alliance. We talked about Native American tribes siding with the French and siding with the English. We talked about the kind of what were the main things that happened after the French and Indian War. We talked about liberty and Native relations and the Proclamation Line of 1763. And again, really focusing on how the French and Indian War is going to lead to the American Revolution. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you like this, please hit subscribe and you'll see some more videos that I put out. Always remember, if you're looking for some history lessons, you know the spot to go. The Vital Spot is the place to be. I thank you for learning. Bye.